Most people who go broke during financial resets don't realize it's happening while it's happening. They don't panic. They don't gamble. They don't make obvious mistakes. They make one quiet decision about themselves. And that decision feels intelligent, responsible, mature. It sounds like this. It's too late for me. I missed my chance. The next phase belongs to other people. And once that belief locks in, everything that follows becomes automatic. They stop adapting. They stop repositioning. They stop paying attention in the right way. By the time the reset is obvious to everyone, the damage isn't temporary. It's structural. In this video, I'm going to show you the single belief that quietly wipes people out during financial resets, why it feels like wisdom when you adopt it, and how people who survive avoid it without taking reckless risks. Everyone right now can feel that the rules are changing. Inflation isn't behaving the way it used to. Institutions that seemed permanent are suddenly fragile. The strategies that built the middle class don't seem to work for the generation trying to enter it. Savings accounts are losing ground. Pensions are underfunded. Currency itself feels less stable than it did 20 years ago. This isn't paranoia. These are observable shifts, and you'd have to be willfully ignorant not to notice them. So people focus on that. They focus on the corruption, the mismanagement, the ways the system seems rigged against ordinary people, and all of that is real. But here's the problem. Focusing on what's broken outside, you can distract you from what's changing inside you, because while you're watching the external chaos, something else is happening. You're forming conclusions about your position in all of this, and one of those conclusions, if you're not careful, becomes permanent. Listen to how certain people talk about the future. There are phrases you hear over and over. I'm too old to start something new. That ship has sailed. If I had known 20 years ago what I know now. I missed the boat on Bitcoin, on real estate, on whatever the opportunity was. These statements sound like realism. They sound like someone who's learned hard lessons and won't be fooled again. But underneath them is something else. Underneath them is a conclusion that goes like this. My moment has passed, and the next phase of economic change will happen without me. You don't say it that directly, you might not even think it consciously, but it's there in the way you engage with new information. Someone mentions a shift in how markets work and you feel a kind of tiredness. Someone talks about adapting to new systems and part of you thinks, that's for younger people. You see someone your age making a significant change, and instead of curiosity, you feel skepticism. What do they know that you don't? Or worse, what's wrong with them that they still think effort matters? This belief doesn't announce itself with a decision. It accumulates. It starts with one missed opportunity that you legitimately missed. Maybe you didn't buy a house when you could have. Maybe you didn't learn a skill that became valuable. Maybe you stayed in a job too long or left one too soon. That's just a fact. That's just something that happened. But then you take that fact and you build a story around it. The story is that you're always going to be late, that you don't have the instincts other people have, that the people who win are fundamentally different from you in some way that can't be changed. And once that story is in place, it starts filtering everything you see. You watch the news about economic changes, and you're watching it the way you'd watch weather. It's something that happens to you. It's not something you can navigate or respond to. You're a spectator now. The game is being played, but you're not on the field anymore. You're in the stands, watching other people win and lose, and your role is just to hold on to whatever you managed to accumulate before you understood the game was rigged. Here's what makes this dangerous. This belief feels like acceptance. It feels like maturity. You're not chasing fantasies anymore. You're not being naive. You've seen enough to know better, and there's something almost peaceful about it. You stop fighting against things you can't control. You stop imagining scenarios where everything turns around. The anxiety of hope goes away, and what's left is a kind of resigned clarity. But that clarity is based on a mistake. The mistake is thinking that because you missed something in the past, the pattern is set, that your trajectory is fixed, that adaptation was something you either did by a certain age or you didn't, and now the window is closed. Here's what actually happens in financial resets. Some people get destroyed. That's true. But here's the part nobody talks about. Some people find positions they never could have found in the stable system. When everything is settled and clear, when the hierarchies are established and the rules are known, there's not much room to move. You're in your lane, and that's where you stay. But when things break down and reform, there are gaps. There are brief periods where the old rules don't quite apply and the new rules aren't fully enforced. Someone paying attention can move in ways that weren't possible before. But you only see those gaps if you're looking for them, and you only look for them if you haven't already decided they're not for you. Let me show you what this actually looked like when it happened before. In 1973, inflation in the United States hit 7%. By 1974, it was 11%. By 1980, it reached 13.5%. If you kept $10,000 in a standard savings account, paying 5% interest during that period, The real purchasing power of that money dropped by more than 40%. You thought you were being conservative. You thought you were protecting what you had, but you were watching your security evaporate in slow motion. The people who got through that period intact weren't the ones who had the most money at the start. They were the ones who recognized that the rules of the previous 20 years had stopped applying. Some moved into real assets when conventional wisdom said real estate was finished. Others shifted into investments that seemed volatile by the standards of the 1960s, but matched the actual risk environment of the 1970s. They didn't have inside information. Most of them didn't even fully understand what was happening. But they had one crucial advantage. They hadn't decided their moment was over. Meanwhile, the people who stayed still, who kept doing what had always worked, who waited for things to return to normal, they lost ground every single year. Not because they were stupid, not because they didn't work hard, but because they were operating on a model of how the world worked that had become obsolete, and they didn't update it. They kept their money in vehicles designed for a 3% inflation environment while living in a 12% inflation environment. They kept making decisions based on stability assumptions that no longer reflected reality. By 1985, the gap between these two groups wasn't about intelligence or effort. It was about who recognized that the equation had changed and who kept waiting for it to change back. The ones who stayed still thought they were being prudent. They looked at the people repositioning themselves and thought those people were being reckless. And by the time it became undeniable that the old normal wasn't returning, the opportunity to adapt had already narrowed significantly. Now look at what's happened since 2020. The M2 money supply increased by more than 40% in 2 years. Housing prices in many markets rose 30 to 50%, while wages grew 3 to 5% annually. The purchasing power of cash savings eroded at rates not seen since the 1970s, even as official inflation figures understated what people experienced at the grocery store and the gas pump. The 10-year Treasury bond, once considered the safest investment in the world, lost more value in 2022 than at any point since the early 1980s. The pattern is repeating. Some people are recognizing that the framework that worked from 1985 to 2020, the framework of steady returns from safe bonds, predictable home appreciation, and savings that held their value, that framework is broken. They're not panicking, they're not making wild bets, but they're adjusting their understanding of what risk actually is in this environment. They're recognizing that what looked safe 5 years ago might be exposure now. And then there's another group, same age, same experience, same awareness that something has fundamentally shifted, but they've made a different conclusion. They've decided that they're too old to learn new rules, that they missed the moment when they should have positioned themselves differently, that the best they can do now is hold tight to what they have and hope it's enough. Here's what most people don't realize at this point. The decision to stay still, the decision that feels like caution, is actually a bet. It's a bet that the current system will stabilize in a form that resembles what you're familiar with. It's a bet that your savings will retain their relative value. It's a bet that the institutions you're depending on will remain solvent and functional. It's a bet that the job market, the housing market, the retirement system, all the structures you've oriented your life around will hold together long enough for you to get through. That might be right, but it's not certainty, it's not safety, it's a wager on a specific outcome. And if that outcome doesn't materialize, if the reset goes deeper than you hoped, if the restructuring takes a different form than you expected, then staying still leaves you completely exposed. You thought you were avoiding risk, but you were concentrating all your risk in one place, the assumption that the current order will persist. The people who adapted during previous resets didn't have perfect foresight. They didn't know exactly what would happen. But they understood something crucial. In a period of fundamental change, the riskiest position is rigidity. The safest move is to stay alert to what's actually happening rather than what you hope will happen. To update your behavior when the conditions update, even if that means abandoning strategies that used to work. Think about what adaptation actually means. It doesn't mean optimism. It doesn't mean believing everything will work out. It means updating your model of how things work when the evidence changes. And here's the problem. Most people have stopped updating their model at some point. They have a framework for understanding money and systems and opportunity that was accurate in 1995 or 2005, or whenever they formed their adult understanding of how the world works. And they're still using that framework even though the underlying reality has shifted completely. They talk about saving your way to security in an environment where savings lose 4% of their value every year. They talk about company loyalty when companies have no loyalty to employees. They reference financial advice from an era when a pension was a given and a house cost 3 times your annual salary. And when you point out that the conditions have changed, they agree with you. They say, yes, everything's different now, everything's worse, the system is broken, but they don't change their behavior. They keep doing what made sense in a world that doesn't exist anymore. And then they feel confirmed in their belief that they can't win because the things they're doing don't work. The most dangerous position in a reset isn't risk, it's stillness. It's doing nothing because you've decided that nothing you do will matter. And the trap is that this decision feels conservative. It feels safe. You're not gambling. You're not chasing anything. You're just protecting what you have. Except what you have might be denominated in something that's being systematically devalued. The safe position might be the one that leaves you completely exposed when the rules finish changing. There are people right now, people your age, people who've been through just as much disappointment and just as many missed opportunities, who are approaching what's coming differently, not with excitement, not with confidence that they'll win, but with a kind of alert readiness. They're not sure what's going to happen, but they haven't concluded that whatever happens will happen without them. They're still watching for the shape of things. They're still adjusting their understanding. They're still considering what moves might make sense. These aren't special people. They're not geniuses. They don't have inside information. They didn't get lucky. The only difference is that they didn't make the final conclusion. They didn't decide their economic story was finished being written. They're in the same uncertain world you are, and seeing the same troubling signs, but they didn't close the door on their own capacity to respond. Here's the belief that wipes people out. It's the belief that adaptation no longer applies to you, that you're too old, too late, too far behind, too something, that the reset is something happening to you rather than something you're moving through, that your position was determined by what you did or didn't do 20 years ago, and now all you can do is endure. This belief feels like wisdom because it's based on real experiences. You did miss things. Some doors did close, some opportunities don't come back. But the conclusion you draw from that, the idea that therefore all future doors are closed, that's not wisdom. That's just a story you're telling yourself. And it happens to be a story that makes you immobile in a moment that requires motion. What's strange is how the belief protects itself. Once it's in place, it filters evidence in a particular way. When you see someone your age making a significant change or taking advantage of a new opportunity, you don't think, maybe I could do something similar. You think, they must have something I don't have. Money, connections, information, luck. Something external that explains why adaptation is possible for them, but not for you. The belief never allows the possibility that the difference is simply that they didn't make the conclusion you made, that they're operating from a different assumption about whether their next move matters. And when you encounter information that contradicts your model of how things work, the belief has a response for that too. You dismiss it as an exception, as an outlier, as something that won't last. You protect the coherence of your worldview by rejecting data that doesn't fit. This is what people do when they've stopped updating. They've built a complete explanation for why things are the way they are, and that explanation includes a role for themselves. The person who sees clearly, who knows better than to hope, who won't be fooled into wasting energy on things that won't work. The problem is that this explanation, no matter how internally consistent it is, might be based on conditions that no longer exist. You might be protecting yourself from risks that aren't actually risks anymore while exposing yourself to risks you don't recognize because they didn't exist in the framework you learned. The belief gives you certainty in an uncertain time, and certainty feels good, but it might be certainty about the wrong things. The people who navigate reset successfully aren't the ones with perfect information or perfect timing. They're the ones who stayed mentally in the game, the ones who kept believing, not that they'll definitely win, but that the outcome isn't written yet, that there's still something to figure out, that their next move still matters, that what they pay attention to and what they do with that attention will determine where they end up. You're not watching this because you're comfortable. You're watching this because some part of you knows that the ground is shifting and standing still might be the riskiest thing you can do. That part of you is right, or the reset is already happening. It's going to be brutal for some people and it's going to create openings for others. The only question is whether you've already decided which group you're in, or whether you're still willing to find out. The reset doesn't care what you believe about yourself, but your belief will determine whether you move when the ground shifts, or whether you stay frozen in a position that made sense in a world that no longer exists. That choice is still yours, even now, especially now.